Dan and Amy, so we have been on this story from the outset. This story about this New Trier High School racial seminar day that's scheduled to take place at the end of the month. Mona Charen, nationally syndicated columnist, has weighed in on this, as so many others, as this continues to pick up steam as a national story. Mona Charen, writing at National Review as well as at the Sun-Times. She writes, no way to prove this, but see if you agree with me. The average American parent would be glad to see his public high school celebrate Martin Luther King Day with tributes to the civil rights movement, lectures on the history of slavery and Jim Crow, and discussions of the challenges faced by blacks and other minorities in America today. Actually, it's not really a guess because curricula like that are found throughout the nation. The program that is being imposed on Winnetka, Illinois, by contrast, is a hard left indoctrination that could have come straight from the pages of Howard Zinn, held on MLK Day itself in 2016. This year's seminar on race, understanding today's struggle and for racial civil rights, scheduled for February 28. New Trier High School high school has scheduled 2 keynote speakers, dozens of seminars from which to choose for its 4,000 students. 1 or 2 are unobjectionable, like black gospel music, Make a Joyful Noise, or Rap with a Social Conscience. But the rest of the offerings are thoroughly turgid agitprop. And that is the conclusion that many parents of New Trier High School students have drawn as well. A parents group has been formed, parentsofnewtrier.org. They actually met with the unbelievably well-compensated New Trier superintendent, Linda Yankee, $420,000 a year.
Whoa.
Before pension and health care benefits.
Oh, my goodness.
A dyed-in-the-wool Democrat primary voter, too, just FYI. The members of this parents group met with the superintendent, including Betsy Hart, who we had on this show. Here's the and they have proposed, like, okay, if you want to do this, then let's hear from a broader range of voices. Let's bring in academics like John McWhorter. Let's bring in accomplished journalists like Jason Riley. Let's bring in economists like Walter Williams, who actually lived through all of the history that we're talking about. Most of the, a lot of the history, not all of it, a lot of the history that we're talking about. Here was what the superintendent did, according to this parents group. Refused the request to add 1 or more suggested speakers to any part of the day to add balance.
Oh, yeah, that's fair and balanced, yeah.
Refused the request to allow a time later in the year when, after working with certified teachers, we could produce a 1 hour or so program to bring diverse voices to help problem solve on race relations. Refused the request to find a way to ensure that parents sign off on the panels their children choose, as they have to do for other coursework. Refused the request to postpone the program until it could be reworked to include fresh voices for problem solving on race relations because, of course, these children are Miss Yankee's children. They're not the children of their actual parents in Plato's Republic on the North Shore. Well, that's not the only voice. There was a letter posted yesterday from a Mr. Robert Blackwell, that starts out, I'm a parent of a child at New Trier, and why don't we pick it up right from there with the aforesaid Robert Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. So you were motivated to weigh in on this issue, and I read the opening line of your letter. Where does it go from there in terms of your view on this racial seminar day that the high school has proposed?
Well, one is I guess, give some context around this and why I decided to write on this.
Okay.
First of all, I'm black, so I have some perspective, and I'm 56, so I'm part of what I call the desegregation generation. I grew up in segregation and was actually part of the first black family that lived in Lombard, Illinois in 1973.
Wow.
And I had a bomb thrown in my house and "nigger go home" written on my lawn. So I've actually dealt with what I call is real racism. However, luckily I've got great parents, and they never let me form the opinions of other races based on what I call the most ignorant of people. While at the same time, I had a lot of, I would say it was not very pleasant, I had a lot of white friends. So, and my parents never really let me judge people based on their race. And I have a daughter. I have a daughter with autism. So I was looking for a safe place where she could go to school. So she went to New Trier, and she's still in the transition program. And the parents, the faculty, and students of New Trier have just been wonderful to her. She's never come home once crying that somebody has mistreated her. She just loves the school, and people have been wonderful to her.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually feel a debt of gratitude to people at the school, including the faculty, for what they've done for my daughter. And the other thing is this is an area that I happen to care a lot about. When I read what was there, I was notified about it. I looked at it, and frankly, I decided this is not something I want my daughter to see. I do not think this represents the best of blacks, or frankly, what most blacks think about these topics. So I was frankly unclear about what the purpose of this seminar day was. And what I was told is that New Trier is a predominantly white school, and lots of their kids leave there and don't have exposure to, other cultures, people from other races that live in our country. So my view is I think there's a better way to do it. Why don't you just invite some black families into your home or into the school? And what you'll find is that they have the exact same issues that you have.
Right.
With their family and work and savings and dealing with teenagers that don't listen to them. And they really have this exact same issues that you have. So I think that if the purpose is trying to gain a better understanding of black Americans, because there's not a lot that live around you, a better way to do this is to invite some black families there, and you interact with them and have your children interact with their children. That is a better way, in my view, and that way you're really not treating blacks like, I would say, some exotic creatures that need to be studied. You find they're just normal people like you who've got the exact same issues you have. And the way that you get to know people is by establishing friendships and commerce.
Mm-hmm.
That is how people get to know one another, and that's why I think that our system of free enterprise has led to the best outcomes. So it doesn't seem to me that this seminar is accomplishing either one or two things. It's helping a predominantly white community that lives on the North Shore really understand black Americans, or if the other thing is that you care about having a better America and having those people who have had some historic disadvantage, or frankly are not as affluent today as the people on the North Shore, then the conversation should be about how to go from poverty to prosperity. And I think this accomplishes neither of those.
But your point of contention in the letter that you wrote is that Black Lives Matter was invited to speak at the school, and you see them as an extreme left-wing socialist group that has nothing positive to say.
Well, I happen to have been in D.C., and I was in Washington at the time of the inauguration, and I was coincidentally walking down the street, and I walked past a sign on the street which was talking about the victims of communism and how many people had been, frankly, murdered by leaders of communist countries. And then Black Lives Matter and the group, the protesters, and Black Lives Matter was one of them, they were advocating for socialism. And it was very clear that it said racism is a tool of capitalism, and the only thing that's going to save us is socialism. And if you look at their website, it says things that I do not believe are good for anybody, especially blacks. They advocate for the disrupting what they call the Western nuclear family, which I can only suppose to mean that they do not believe a father, mother, and children is a healthy way to raise a family. And I absolutely do not believe that, and I don't think most blacks believe that either.
Yeah, and with respect to the school, you've had a great experience with your daughter at the school with both her fellow students as well as the teachers, and that's great. What about the leadership of the school, though? You write in your letter, they, meaning those people who were invited, and I guess perhaps the organizers too, that they should just admit they're a group of extreme left-wing socialists that has nothing positive to offer except Marxist revolutionary propaganda. That's a pretty strong statement. It's also a pretty accurate statement. So the question is, what exactly is going on at New Trier that they would sanction something like this and be so intransigent when groups of parents come to them, as spoke with the superintendent there, and say, well, why don't we just expand the conversation? You can have people you think are important to speak, but what about these other individuals who are all accomplished in their own rights and have something important to contribute to the discussion, and we expand the parameters of dialogue? What's the problem with that? There seems to be a problem, at least from the administration's perspective.
Well, listen, frankly, I don't understand it. It's like I said, I don't understand what it. At the end, typically you do something because you want to accomplish something specific, and I'm not sure what that specific thing is. Again, I think it is if it is to expose young people, and these are young people, to people from different backgrounds who have different experiences, then I think there's a better way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you ought to talk to real people and invite people, families, to come and interact, get to know one another. I think that is better, in my view, than having a seminar on race, where it's not really, it seems to me, very one-sided. And you're actually not talking to, I don't think, I see no balance in this at all.
And it seems, I mean, from what I've read of the practicum and the back and forth I've seen, including, by the way, letters of response to that parentsofnewtrier.org website from proponents of the seminar and opponents of that parents group's position, that are, profanity laden and hysterical and unhinged, which also speaks perhaps to that side's perspective and intellectual heft. But it seems to me the overriding purpose of this is to have a bunch of white kids, and that's New Trier is like 98% plus white. Have a bunch of white kids attend this seminar, shame them for being white, make them apologize for being white, and think that they always have to apologize for being white, and that somehow is going to improve race relations. Or maybe it's actually not about improving race relations. Maybe it's just about trying to gain power through the use of race by certain interested parties.
Well, listen, I can't say what's really in people's hearts or why they're doing what they're doing. So
right.
I don't want to, put words in their mouth. I just think this is, if what they want to do is to have young people who are not normally exposed to African Americans, there's a better way to do it.
Yeah.
And I do not think listening to people who regularly use the F word, the N word, as a part of their poetry or speech or anything is helpful. In fact, I think I, who have a daughter who happens to be black, do not want her thinking that's what black people are. And I also do not think that it is helpful for white kids who don't have lots of exposure to black kids to have them have their view of blacks tainted, in my view, by people who regularly say the F word, the N word, and that America is somehow this evil place, which seems to me that's another track that I see here, that America is somehow this evil place.
Yeah.
And I think that is not true. And we do have issues in the country. I think they're focusing on the wrong issues. I think the right issue is how you go from poverty to prosperity. Because nowhere in the world are poor people healthy, educated, and safe. And conversely, nowhere in the world are affluent people not healthy, educated, and safe, no matter what their color is.
Yeah.
So if what you really want is to have blacks to live better lives, then we should look at systems that have taken people from poverty to prosperity. And there is nothing that compares to free enterprise that delivers people out of poverty like the free enterprise system.
I think next year that New Trier should do a Robert Blackwell seminar day. What do you think about that?
Sign him up.
I doubt very many people will be interested in that.
Robert Blackwell, parent of a New Trier High School student. Thanks for joining us and sharing your perspective. Appreciate it.
Terrific. Have a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our
Bye-bye.
turnkey.pro answer line.